What is up, everyone? My name is Shadi, and today we're going to be building a Reddit clone with Next.js, Firebase v9, Recoil, which is a state management library for React that I love, and Chakra UI, which is an amazing React UI library that's going to help us out a lot with our CSS. And I'm super excited about this project because we are going to get to cover so many things in depth, and we're going to build a ton of full stack features front to back that are going to really allow us to explore all the technologies that we're using for this build. So on the front end with Next.js and React, we're going to look at things like server-side rendering, using the Next.js router for client-side routing, building our own custom React hooks, using pretty much all of the hooks that React has to offer, and overall just front-end architecture with React. And then more on the back end with Firebase, we're going to get to cover pretty much the entire Firebase v9 landscape, everything from authentication to the Firestore Database. We're going to look at how to use real-time data to implement real-time features with the Cloud Firestore Database. We're going to look at Cloud Functions, Firebase Storage, we're going to store images, security rules, database transactions, and batch writes, which if you don't know what that is, don't worry, I will explain it when we get to it. And overall, modeling data with a NoSQL database, which is what Cloud Firestore is. And this entire thing is going to be written in TypeScript as well, which I think is super worth it for you to learn. And it's going to make your code a lot more robust, as we're going to see. So there is lots to learn here. My aim with this project was to include enough things and go in depth into enough things for you to actually take all this stuff and apply it into your own project, so you can build pretty much whatever you want with React, Next.js, Firebase, or whatever. All right, so here is exactly what we're going to build. For those of you that are familiar with Reddit, you can tell that this looks pretty much exactly the same as the real product. I spent a lot of time trying to make it look pretty much identical. And so pretty much everything from the layout of all of the pages to the drop-down menus to the font sizes and everything is designed to look and feel exactly like the real product. And I'm super excited to show you how to build this. So here is the homepage. As you can see, we have this feed that's showing a bunch of posts from a bunch of different communities. This user that I have logged in right now for this demo has not joined any communities yet, so it's just posts from a bunch of random communities. And then on the right-hand side, we have some other UI elements, and we have like things like community recommendations. So right now it's showing the top communities, which are just ranked by number of members within those communities. And this design is completely responsive as well, so it works beautifully on mobile. So you're going to learn a lot about responsive design and just overall how to build up pretty much any UI you would like in both desktop and mobile. I'm just going to log out because I'm going to log back in a second. So if I wanted to join one of these communities, I would of course have to be signed in, and this modal is accessible through the Navbar as well. So let's talk about authentication. We're going to cover the entire authentication flow offered by Firebase v9. We're going to learn how to authenticate users with third-party OAuth providers like Google and any other ones you might wish, like Twitter, Facebook, GitHub, anything you'd like, anything that's offered by Firebase. And also looking at how to sign in and sign up with email or password. We're also going to look at password resetting as well. So the entire authentication flow is going to be covered for you so that you can apply it in your own projects. All right, cool. So I'm just going to sign back into that user account that I created for myself. So now that I'm signed in, I can actually join any communities that I may find interesting. So I can join as many as I would like, and then they would show up actually inside of this little drop down here, which represents my communities, and I can access them directly from here. I'm going to talk about this create community thing in a little bit. And this drop down is the exact same as Reddit has it. And then I can also leave communities right from within this side panel if I didn't actually want to join them. And then I can actually view the communities directly from here as well. So let's go into Tesla Motors, and I can view all of the posts inside of this community. I can see the number of members in here, when it was created, and all of this stuff related to the community. And I can actually join and leave the community right from inside of here as well, which is pretty cool. And I'm going to touch on the creation of posts in just a short while. All right, so looking more closely at the post now, I can see the vote status, so how many upvotes or downvotes this thing has, how many comments it has, the user who created this post, when it was posted, what community it's posted in. I can like this post or upvote it, I can downvote it. I'm going to upvote this one. And then we can also view posts in a single page view. All right, so this post is from Elon Musk, and he somehow has found the time between Tesla and SpaceX to pick up baking. And he's posted about it here, and they look pretty unreal, to be honest. And then I can scroll down to the comment section, and I can see all of the comments on this post, who commented on it, when it was commented, and I can also leave a comment myself. So let's leave a comment for Elon because he is clearly really good at baking. I'm gonna say, hey Elon, nice cupcakes, smiley face. Click comment, and I can leave that comment there for him, and I can delete it and do whatever I want with it. All right, cool. Let's now talk about the actual creation of posts because that's probably the most critical part of Reddit's functionality. So let's just go into a random community. We can go into Tesla and we can just go into create post, and we can just create a post that's called my first post in all caps. And we will say, hey everyone, this is my first post with a bunch of exclamation points to show how excited we are. And then we can actually post an image along with it as well. So let's just select this one here. And this has absolutely nothing to do with Tesla, but maybe I'm on the Tesla engineering team and I'm working on the latest full self-driving software. So then I can go back to the text inputs of the post and I can click post, and then it will take me back to the Tesla community page where I can actually see my post, which is pretty cool. And I can view it in that same single page view as well. And there are no comments yet. So I'm going to give myself an upvote because why not? And I can actually delete the post as well. So let's delete this because it's not really related to Tesla. And I'm actually just going to rejoin this community because I did leave before. So yeah, on Reddit, you don't actually have to join a community to post in it. So I built ours the exact same way. All right, cool. So let's go talk about how we can actually create our own communities now. So if I go to the drop-down menu, we saw this before. We can see that our communities are in here, but then I said that there was this option to create our own communities. So if I click on this modal pops up that will ask us for the name of our community and also the community type. So public, restricted, or private. This is the exact same flow as Reddit. So let's create a community called Shaddy's Community. Click create community. It will be created and we are automatically joined into that community because we created it. So that kind of makes sense. And we're also added as a moderator of that community. Which basically just means we're an admin. So now inside of this community, I can pretty much do everything the same as I can in other communities. I create posts, comment on posts, etc. And I can also change the image of this community because I am an admin. So let's test that out. Let's see what that looks like. So click on this Google logo because it has this nice circular shape to it, which fits the shape of this. So if I click save changes, that image is actually going to be uploaded to our cloud Firestore Storage database, and that's going to update our community image, which is super cool. All right, cool. So let's actually get into the build now. Now, obviously, we cannot build every single feature that Reddit has because this tutorial would be insanely long. So I want to focus a lot on the core functionality of Reddit. If there are any specific features of Reddit that you would like to see, please let me know in the comments and I can potentially cover that in a future video. As I mentioned before, we're going to cover a lot of concepts. There is so much to learn. I'm super excited to build this with you, and I'm going to be building it completely from scratch. So if you have any concerns at any point throughout the video, just leave a comment with like the timestamp and I will 100% reply to the comment. Other than that, I think we are good to go. I hope you really enjoy this tutorial. Let's get going. All right, everybody, welcome to the tutorial. We're going to get going with the build now. So on the left, I just have a terminal open to the folder that I'm going to place our new project in. Feel free to place yours wherever you'd like. And I'm going to have my code open on the left once we create the new project in just a second. And during the early stages of this build, and especially for this first part, our pace might be a tad bit slower than for most of the project since we are going to come across a lot of new things for the very first time, such as working with Chakra, Recoil, and also TypeScript. And I want to make sure that you all have a really strong fundamental understanding of all of these tools so that the entire build makes complete sense and you can get as much out of it as possible. So I will spend a bit more time explaining things in more detail the first time around, but do know that after getting our first few reps in with each of these things, the pace will be quite a bit faster in future parts. And please do let me know in the comments what you think of the pace and I can adjust accordingly. Okay, so what we're going to do is start off by just creating a brand new Next.js application. We're going to Google create next app and go to the Next.js docs and grab this command here, which is the command for creating a brand new TypeScript project with this TS flag. So I'm going to paste this in my terminal, and I'm also going to add the folder name that I'm going to place this project into, and I'm just going to let that install, and once it's done, I will open it up in VS Code. It may take a few seconds for you. Perfect. Now, once that's done, what we can do is just cd into that directory, and then I'm just going to open it up in VS Code. And I'm going to spin up the development server so we can see the newly created app that we just made. So get this set up on the left. And let's now run the development server by just running npm run dev. That's going to spin our app up on localhost 3000. So let's go to that. And here is our brand new app. I'm gonna open up the console as well and just put it on the bottom so we can see any errors and our console logs that we may add in the future. Cool, so this is a bare bones Next.js project. The files that we're going to be interested in right now are going to be this app.tsx and index.tsx. So app.tsx essentially represents our entire application, and every page and every component that we create is going to be a child of this component. And index.tsx is everything that's being rendered on the screen here. It represents our index route or homepage. And the way client-side routing works in Next.js is that every file added inside of this pages folder is going to be added to our routes. So for example, if I have a file named blog.tsx, I would be able to go to a route localhost 3000/blog, and we can create nested routes as well with folders. And this will make a lot more sense when we start building out some of our pages. All right, so we're not going to need any of this. So I'm just going to remove this entire div here. And I'm going to just add an empty div that says hello. And we can see that on the right. So now let's go install Chakra UI and get it set up with our app. So I'm going to go just search for Chakra UI. And if I just go to the very first thing, chakraui.com, and go to get started, they have a bunch of choices for frameworks that you can use. So we're just going to click on Next.js because that's what we're using. And there are a few packages that we're going to need to install. So the Chakra and a few dependencies that they have. So I'm just going to copy this command here, come over to our terminal, throw that in there. And I'm also going to, at the same time, install Firebase as well as Recoil because these sort of represent our core packages that we're going to be using. So let's go ahead and install these. It might take a few seconds for you. Awesome. So when that's done, what we can do is come over to our app.tsx, and we're going to need to wrap our application in what's called a ChakraProvider. And if you just scroll down a bit on this installation page, you can see that that's exactly what they're doing here. So this is pretty much exactly the same thing that we're going to do. So we're going to come over here, and I'm going to take this component and wrap it in that ChakraProvider, which should just automatically import for me. If it does not, just import it from Chakra UI React and just paste the component in there. And this just ensures that we have access to Chakra throughout our entire application. All right, so one quick note is something that you might notice depending on the time that you watch this is that you might see this error in your console. And this is basically just saying that Chakra UI has not yet released updates to be completely up to date with React 18. React 18 was just released, I think, a few weeks ago. It's super brand new. And so depending on when you watch this, you may or may not see this. I did do some research on this, and I found that there is an open issue in the Chakra UI GitHub. And there's a whole conversation thread in here regarding this, but basically one of the core maintainers said that they are working on a solution to React 18. However, it will take a few days, and this was just posted 4 days ago. So again, depending on when you watch this, you may or may not see this. If you do see it, do not worry, it can just be ignored. It's not a huge deal. I just wanted to briefly mention it in case you were concerned. All right, so what I'm going to do is just make some brief adjustments to our folder structure here. In the root of our project, I'm just going to create a folder called source, and I'm going to put pages as well as styles into that source folder. And this is a common practice to do. It's just a preference of mine. I prefer to keep everything that we're going to write inside of a folder called source. It just makes sense to me. And this is a common practice. A lot of people do this, and Next.js even has an entire page on their docs explaining how to use a source folder. It will break initially, but all we need to do is just recompile our development server, and Next.js knows to look for that source folder, and it will just rebuild itself to work with that folder. All right, perfect. So now we are ready to create our Chakra UI theme and pass that to our ChakraProvider as a prop. And since Chakra is going to be handling all of our styling for this build, we actually don't even need this styles folder, so we can just completely delete it. And our app should function exactly the same. We are not going to have any styles provided by CSS. Everything's going to be handled by Chakra. All right, so let's create our Chakra theme. So I'm just going to go to the Chakra UI theme docs. If we go to customize theme here, we're basically going to do exactly this. Create a theme, which is just represented by a JavaScript object with the help of this extend theme hook from Chakra UI. And we're going to pass it as a prop to our provider. And we are going to have access to all of these styles throughout our app. So themes basically contain styles that are going to be present throughout our entire application, like brand colors and fonts, and also styling for common components like buttons. And this just ensures that your app looks nice and consistent from a UI and styling perspective. Okay, so inside of our source folder, I'm going to create a new folder called Chakra. And inside of that folder, I'm going to create a file called theme.typescript. Now, I'm going to come over here and copy this from the Chakra docs. And I'm also going to add an export to the theme variable here because we're going to need to import it in app.tsx. So let's go and do that. So import theme from Chakra theme, and then let's pass that theme to our ChakraProvider. Just exactly what they're doing over here. Okay, so let's go to our theme, and inside of here, I'm going to make our main color the actual Reddit orange, and that's going to be represented by brand 100. So every time we want to access the Reddit color throughout our app, which is going to be a decent amount, we can just access it by using brand.100. And that will make more sense once we start using it. It's very, very simple though. So the actual hex code for the real Reddit orange is FF3C00. So that is the actual hex code for the Reddit brand color. All right, and inside of this theme, we're going to also add the font that we're going to be using, and our entire body is going to be using the font Open Sans with a fallback of sans serif. And what we need to do in order to use Open Sans is to actually install it. Chakra makes that extremely easy. If you just search for Chakra UI fonts, you can go to using fonts, and the example in their docs actually uses Open Sans. So that is perfect. And they use a package called font source. So let's just grab that and go to our app and install it. So once that's done, all we need to do is import it into our theme file, just like they're doing over here. So we're going to come over here and we're going to do import at font source and Open Sans. And we should see our app change to that font. It might not be noticeable right now. And this font is extremely close to the real Reddit font. And we're just going to actually import a few different weights of this font so that we have light, regular, and heavy so that we can bold things. So I'm going to have 300.css. I think that they have to use the CSS extension. Yep. And we are going to also grab 400 and 700. All right, once that is done, you'll notice that if you go to reddit.com, they have this sort of gray background throughout the entire app. It's present everywhere. So what we're going to do is add that as well. And the way to do that in our app is to change the global styling of our entire body. So the way to do that, we're going to pass in a key called styles. And inside of here, we're going to pass a key called global. And we're going to give this a callback function, which is going to contain the key body, which is going to have BG for background, and we're going to say gray 200. Perfect. And if you're wondering what this gray.200 thing is, if you just go to Chakra UI theme, inside of the default theme, you can see all of the colors that they have available. There are so many of them. There's a lot of really nice colors in here. And yeah, this library is honestly amazing. You're going to see as we get more and more into the build why I love Chakra so much and why I'd probably never use anything else. And it makes styling and making things look really good super easy. All right, so one last thing that we're going to just add in here that we're going to come back to in a bit is this key called components. And a component is basically any UI component offered by Chakra. So for example, buttons and inputs and etc. Everything that's in here, you can add global styling to so that it appears very consistent throughout your app. So for example, a button, we can add styles for the button a single time and just reuse them throughout our app. And we can even create variants and stuff for our buttons, and we're going to see this when we create our Navbar buttons here. You can see that there's an outline variant and a filled variant. We're going to create those in a bit, but how that would look would you'd basically just pass in the button component, and I will come back to this very shortly when we get to those buttons in the Navbar. I think we can now start actually working on the layout of the page. So what we're going to do is create a Next.js layout, and if you go to the layout docs, basically, we're going to create the exact same thing as this, and this represents the literal layout of our entire app, and we can put components in here that we want present on every single page, like the navbar. Without this layout component, we would have to add the navbar to every single one of our pages. That's just how Next.js works, and we are going to wrap our entire application in this layout component, and that is where the children prop is going to come from. All right, so I just took a little break, and I also briefly added a remote GitHub repository to my project so that I can put it in the description description for you guys. So if you do need to reference the code at all, it is available on GitHub. Link is in the description. All right, so now let's actually build this layout component and get into building the navbar and actually get into the fun UI stuff. So I'm going to create a folder inside of source called components. And this is where all of our React components are going to go. And inside of components, I'm going to create a folder called layout because we're going to have several different layout components that we create throughout our project. And then inside of layout, I'm going to create a file called layout.tsx. And before we actually create a component, I just briefly want to mention this React TypeScript snippet VS Code extension. I highly recommend you to download this. It's going to be really useful. I'm going to use it a lot. And basically we can use little keyboard shortcuts to create skeleton TypeScript React components. And it just makes developing a lot faster, so you don't have to write all of this out from scratch. And we get all of the TypeScript stuff here just handed to us out of the box. So when we work in TypeScript with React, we create types for each component, and these types specify what props need to be passed to this component. And this ensures that we're passing everything that this component needs to prevent bugs and crashes. And this is something that JavaScript does not do. So TypeScript basically just points out these errors to us before we even compile the app to make sure that everything works smoothly. And React-FC is just the type of a functional component, and this just indicates that that is what we are returning out of this function. And if this looks foreign to you because you're new to TypeScript, do not worry, we're going to use this a ton throughout this build, and you're going to know it like second nature once we're done. But yeah, highly recommend this extension if you do not have it. Okay, so we're not actually going to need props inside of our layout. We're not going to take anything, so when we don't need props, we can just get rid of it like that. And this just basically indicates that we're returning a React functional component. That's what we're returning out of this layout function. And we're going to see this a lot. So we can get rid of this div, and instead we're going to return just a React fragment. It's going to be very similar to what you see on the right. And we're going to take in our children argument, which basically represents our entire application in this case. And we're going to have a navbar component, which we're going to create in just a second. And then we're going to put our children inside of our main tag. And we're not going to have a footer for this application. If you want to create one, feel free to do that. Okay, so now let's create another folder inside of our components folder called navbar, because we're going to have a bunch of components inside of our navbar. It's going to have a ton of children. And inside of navbar, let's create our root navbar file. I'm going to call it navbar.tsx. Now, in React, it is common practice to name the root file of a folder just index.tsx. For this project, I'm not going to do that just because it would kind of get confusing. If you're looking at my tabs, you would just see a bunch of files named index, 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 index. And just to avoid that, I'm just going to name the root files the name of their folder. I just want to make a quick note on that, not a huge deal or anything. Okay, so what I'm going to do is use that snippet again to create our skeleton component, and I'm going to remove the props type because we're not going to take in any props to our navbar. And I'm going to change this text briefly to just navbar. And now that we actually have a navbar defined, let's go back to our layout component and just re-enable this. And a quick keyboard shortcut, if you have a component in your file that has not yet been imported, you can go to this thing and press Command period, and this will pop up a little menu and you can automatically import it. On a Windows, I think it would be Control period. Cool, so now if we go to our application file and we import that layout component and we wrap our application in that component, we should then see that navbar actually being displayed there, which is pretty cool. So we are completely done with this layout file. We can just close it. We are not going to touch it again for the rest of this build. So we can actually start building out navbar now. And this is where we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of Chakra UI. All right, so we can get rid of this div here, and we're actually going to build a meaningful navbar, and we're going to use this UI component called Flex from Chakra. Now what Flex is it's essentially just a div with CSS flexbox already applied to it out of the box, and we're going to use this a lot throughout our application, so it's super handy. And Chakra UI saves us a lot of time writing out flexbox styles over and over again. So let's say I wrote the text navbar in here. You'll see that it appears exactly the same as when it was just a regular div. However, now the div has CSS flexbox applied to it, which we're going to need once we start adding more components. So now let's talk about styling Chakra UI components. So the way to do that is we can pass any CSS argument as a prop to any of our Chakra UI components. So for example, let's say I wanted to add a background color of white to our navbar. I can simply do that by just typing BG. So let's say I do BG is equal to white, and I want to add a border of 1 pixel solid red. That's how easy it is to style things. All right, cool. So now that we actually know how to apply styles to our Chakra UI components, let's move forward. So I'm going to give this navbar a height of 44 pixels and padding 6 pixels and 12 pixels. If you have not seen this notation for padding before, this when you give it 2 arguments, this basically means top, bottom, right, left. And what I'm going to do now is create the component for the logos. And our logos are going to be in the top left. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to actually create these logos now, and this is going to consist of 2 images. The reason there is 2 is because I could not find a single SVG file online that had both this Reddit text and this icon in a single file. I was able to find both of them separately though. And the way to use external assets and image assets like that is in our public folder, we can create another folder called images, and it does actually need to be inside of the public folder that is required by Next.js. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paste in a bunch of image files, PNGs and SVGs that we're going to use throughout this build. There's only about 6 of them, and I'm just going to paste them in here. For you, I would recommend to just go to the link on GitHub and grab these assets so that you don't have to go online and find them. And these are just SVG icons that I found online, and they all work very well. What that's going to look like, the way we're going to use these is we're going to have 2 images, and these are Chakra UI images, not Next images. And the first one is going to be, we're going to go into that images folder I just created, and I called this thing redditface.svg. Let's go back to our app. So that showed up there. And the second one is going to be images reddit text.svg. Perfect. And let's give this one a height of 30 pixels, and this one a height of 46 pixels. Now you can see that they are a little bit misaligned there, and that is where flexbox is going to start to come in handy. So if I go to this logo container and I give it the align prop, which is short for align items, and I do center, it will center those items for me. Cool. And we're actually going to add a media query to this second image text, or the logo text, because you'll see on the real Reddit, when we get to a certain screen size, like on mobile, that Reddit text is not actually visible. It's not until we get to the medium screen sizes that it's actually visible. So I'm going to show you how to write a media query in Chakra. So we're pretty much covering all these Chakra fundamentals so that everything makes sense throughout the entire app. So once we cover this stuff once, it'll just go a lot quicker when we get to it again. So basically, we're going to add a media query to the display CSS property. And the way media queries work in Chakra is we apply them to single CSS properties rather than writing a single media query with a bunch of CSS properties like you would in raw CSS. We're going to do it property by property. And that may sound a little bit like it's more work at first, but it's actually not, and it's actually really clean and easy. We're not going to write that many media queries. It's actually quite simple. So for our display, for our text, we're going to make base to be none, and base represents mobile screen sizes because Chakra is a mobile first UI library. So mobile screens, we do not want this thing to be displayed. And then at medium size screens and up, we're going to make it unset. And unset is basically just the opposite of display none. At mobile screen sizes, it is not visible. And once we get to medium, it is then visible because we apply unset. And we're going to write quite a few media queries, particularly for the navbar. It is pretty responsive. As you'll see, there's a lot going on here in terms of responsiveness. So the navbar is going to have quite a bit of media queries. So we're going to get really good at this. Cool. So I'm going to add the other components that we're going to create in just a sec, and then I'm going to comment them out. But we're basically going to have the directory, which is a drop-down menu item, a search input, and write content. Cool. And write content is basically represented by, if I log in quickly, it's going to contain those authentication buttons that we were looking at, but it's also going to contain all of these icons and stuff and this drop-down menu. There's a lot going on the right-hand side on the navbar, so I wanted to give it its own parent component, hence the write content component. All right, so now let's start working on our search input. So I'm going to go to our app, and I'm going to, inside of the navbar folder, I'm going to create another component called SearchInput input.tsx, and I'm going to use our snippet once again. And we are eventually going to take in a user here as a prop once we get to authentication. I'm going to leave this empty for now. All right, so let's start developing this component. So I'm going to get rid of this div. I'm going to instead use our famous flex component, and we're going to use this so many times. All right, so I'm going to leave the styling for this blank right now. We're going to come back and add some stuff later once we have some more of this input built. And the first component we're going to add in here is called an input group. So if you want to go to the Chakra UI input docs, we're basically going to have something similar to this here, where we're going to have an input with an icon. And Chakra makes that super easy. They have, I believe, what's called add elements inside the input. So this is exactly what we're going to do. So I'm just going to copy this input group here, and I'm going to paste it over here. And again, I'm going to use that auto import thing that I used before, command period. And this is amazing. Watch this. So before I showed you how to do it with a single component, but now look, I can do it with add all missing imports. And that is just unreal. So you'll notice that these did not import, and you may be wondering why. And that is because they are coming from a different library that we're going to have to install, which is Chakra UI icons. So what we're going to do is just going to go to the browser, and I'm going to search Chakra UI icons. I'm going to go into here, and I'm literally just going to copy the installation command and paste it in our project and install that there. Cool. So now that we have that installed, I can go back and try that auto import thing, and it should pick it up now because we have installed the library. Okay, and we do not need this second input group. Sorry, I did not mean to copy the second one. We will get rid of that. And when we save that, I have auto formatting on. That's why everything moves when I save the file. If you do not, I recommend you to install Prettier and turn on save on format. You can do that by going into your VS Code settings. Just do a quick Google search on how to do that. It's pretty simple, and it's very, very handy. Cool. So we actually will not be in this app file for a little bit. So I'm just going to close that. And now that we have a search input defined, I'm going to come back here and re-enable this. Just going to comment that out. I'll move it up here. I'm going to comment those out, and I'm going to import it from search input. I'm going to save this. And for some reason, we are not seeing anything. We need to refresh. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we can see that something is there, but it looks kind of not great. It does not look anything like the Reddit thing. So let's do some work on that. All right, first off, the icon is completely wrong. So let's make it the proper icon. We're going to make it the search icon from Chakra UI icons. And another keyboard shortcut that's really, really cool is if you do Command-Shift-P, it'll open up the command line in VS Code, and we have a bunch of settings that we can tell VS Code to do. And you can search for organized imports. Mine's at the top because I used it recently. But if you just search for organized imports and you press enter, it's going to automatically get rid of all of the unused imports and sort them alphabetically. I like to have React at the top. So now we have the search icon there, and phone number is definitely not what we want to put in there. I believe on Reddit it says search Reddit. And now we're going to add a bunch of styles to our input and change the color, and we're going to make it look identical to Reddit. So let's go over here. We don't want the type equals telephone here. So let's add a font size of 10 points, and let's change the color of the placeholder. And the way to access pseudo classes in Chakra is to do it with a underscore. Because placeholder, we're accessing the styling of it. It's actually a pseudo class if you were to write it in regular CSS. So to do that, we do need to include the underscore. So we're going to give the placeholder text a color of gray 500, and we're going to add the hover pseudo class. And we're going to make it on hover. We're going to make the background white. We're going to make the border 1 pixel solid, and we're going to make the border color blue 500. Cool. So now you can see it's looking a bit more like Reddit. Where is Reddit? And the length of it and everything is going to be handled in a bit. Now let's do another pseudo class called focus. And we're going to make the outline none. The border, again, 1 pixel solid, and the border color, not border collapse, border color, not border collapse for the second time, border color blue 500. And we're going to give it a height of 34 pixels and a background of gray 50. Cool, and I'm going to make this a bit darker to match more of the color of the text. All right, now let's go back up to our parent flex container, and we're going to add some properties here. Now we're going to say flex grow is equal to 1, and that means it's just going to basically take up the remaining width of its parent container. And a lot of these styles will make a lot more sense once we actually have all of the Navbar components in place. But essentially, flex grow means basically just take up the remaining room available. We're going to add another property, margin right, and in Chakra UI, you can just say MR. I'm going to say 2. And that is just, I think, pixels. And we're just going to say align is going to be equal to center. Cool. So now you can see that we actually have the navbar, and the styles are exactly the same as Reddit. This icon you can see is a little bit misaligned. And when I was doing the build, I wasn't able to use flexbox on the input. It was being kind of weird. So what I'm going to do is just add a bottom margin of 1. And that should make it look a bit more centered. That's pretty much it for the search input for right now. We're going to come back to this in a bit once we have the user, because some of the styling is going to change. But yeah, pretty simple component. All right, you guys, we're now going to start working on the write content of the navbar. And write content is basically the parent of everything going on over here. We have the authentication buttons and this drop-down menu, and then all of those icons that we saw when we were logged in. That is going to be a child of write content. All right, I just wanted to mention that when developing this application, I tried my very best to keep the components as clean and as modular as possible, and I avoided writing extremely long components because it can be really easy to do that in React. And I wanted to get as close to a production React application as possible to show you guys how to write really clean and extendable React applications, so you kind of see how it is done in the industry, and hopefully this will help you out with your job search if your goal is to land a developer job. All right, so inside of our navbar folder, I'm going to create a folder called write content. And inside of write content, I'm going to create the root write content file, writecontent.tsx. And I'm going to use our snippet. And we are going to take in a user in this component as well, like the search bar, but we don't have a user yet. So I'm just going to comment that out, and we will come back to that in a bit. And we're going to return a React fragment. And this React fragment is going to have a component called Auth modal, which we're going to create shortly. That is going to be the modal that pops up when you click one of these buttons. That's what that's going to be. But we're going to get to that shortly. And I'm going to create a flex component here. And inside of flex, we're going to have a component called auth buttons, which we're going to create right now. And just before we do that, I'm going to give this the properties of justify to be center. Justify is short for justify content. I'm going to give align to be center, align items to be center. So this is basically how we center a div. This is the CSS equivalent of display flex, justify content is equal to center, and align items is equal to center, for those of you who might be wondering. So let's go create the auth buttons component. And the auth buttons are going to be the login and sign up buttons that we see over here on reddit.com. So let's go into write content and create a file called authbuttons.tsx. Again with the snippet, and we're not going to take any props into this component, so I can just get rid of this. And we're going to again return a React fragment, and we're actually going to start using the button component from Chakra UI. So I'm going to add a button called login, and another one with the text sign up. Cool. And let's go back to our write content and enable this and do our auto import. All right, so that's not, oh, it's because we're not actually even rendering this right now. So let's go back to navbar and re-enable this. We're going to put directory up here, going to comment this out, and let's put our import write content. Okay, so you can see those buttons popped up on the right. However, they look absolutely nothing like the Reddit buttons. So we have some work to do. All right, so since buttons are going to appear in our application several times and we want to apply consistent styling to them, we're going to go back to our Chakra theme and just quickly create the global styling for our buttons so that we don't have to repeat a bunch of component styling every single time we create a button. So inside of our Chakra folder, I'm going to create another file called button.ts. This is how you would style your components globally so that you have consistent styling for all of your components. All right, so let's see how we can create global component styling for our button. So I'm going to import something from at Chakra UI, not icons, theme, and I'm going to import the type component style config. And this is a TypeScript thing so that we get auto-completion when we're creating our button. We're going to create a button of type component style config. So another keyboard shortcut that's super handy in TypeScript is if you press Control spacebar, you will see a list of all of the properties that this particular type or interface is expecting. And this is really a first glance at the power of TypeScript. If you have not used TypeScript before, you're going to be amazed when we write some more advanced TypeScript at how robust and readable and bug-proof it makes the code. So I'm going to create this thing called base style. So let's do the border radius and look at this auto-completion. This is all thanks to TypeScript. Without this type, we would actually not have this auto-completion, right? It would have no idea like what this thing is. So TypeScript at its finest. Okay, let's bring that type back. Okay, and inside of base style, we're going to give a border radius of 60 pixels. And I'm going to show you how to just apply like a global color. Let's make it our brand 100 color, the Reddit color we created. And now in order to actually use this in our Chakra theme, what we need to do is go into our theme.ts file. And remember how when I was creating this theme, I mentioned that we were going to add the button in here eventually. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to import that button from that button file. And then we're going to enable it here. And then you should see that those global styles have been applied to our button. So if you go back to our button, if you say add a border of 2 pixel solid red, you'll see that those are applied to every single button we create. So this is global now. So what we want to do is, because our buttons have slightly varied styles, we want to put everything that applies to all of them inside of this file, and then anything that is specific, we will just add the same way we have been adding other Chakra UI styles. So I'm just going to paste in the remaining styles for our global buttons because I just don't want to spend a bunch of time writing out a bunch of CSS. Once you kind of understand this, the rest will make total sense. So I'm going to go and just grab that from my other code base and paste it in here. So this looks like a lot, but it's actually not. We just have some base styling being applied to all of our buttons. And then we have sizes, which basically just indicate any styling we want to apply to this component at certain screen sizes. So the most important thing to pay attention to in here is the variant. We have our solid variant, which has a blue background, and then we just have our outline variant, which is a white background with a blue border, which looks like this red button here. Okay, so we're going to close this because we're not really going to need it anymore, and our login button actually is going to have the variant outline. And look at this, TypeScript gives us this nice auto-completion. We can see all of the options. So if I click outline, you can see on the right that that's actually being applied now. And like I said before, all of these styles that are specific to these buttons only, we're going to write the same way we've been writing other Chakra UI styles. So for example, the height, not every button is going to have the same height, so I did not put it in the global styles. I'm going to add it to each button specifically. So this button is going to have a height of 28 pixels, and we're going to see some more media queries here. We're going to have on display at mobile screens, we're not going to want to see this thing. And small, we're going to make it display is equal to flex. The width, we're also going to have a media query on. At base mobile sizes, it's going to be 70 pixels, and at medium screen sizes, it's going to be 110 pixels. Margin right of 2. And then I'm going to add a onClick function, which I'm just going to leave empty for now because it's not going to do anything. But we are going to have onClicks on both of these buttons that are going to trigger that modal. And that's going to prompt us to log in. And I'm going to basically do a lot of the similar stuff to the sign up button. So I'm going to make the variant of this solid, but by default it is solid, so I don't really have to specify that. I'm going to make the height of this equal to 28 pixels. And I'm going to go grab all of these things from this button because it's going to apply to this button as well. So now we can see that those buttons are looking pretty good on the right, and we can look at the responsiveness here. They disappear on mobile and they get slightly smaller at smaller screen sizes, and this behavior is identical to Reddit. All right, you guys, we are now ready to start working on that modal that I previously mentioned before, the authentication modal that's actually going to pop up when we click one of these buttons. That's going to allow us to create user accounts and log users in. So we're going to get a first glance at building a modal, as well as we're going to start implementing Recoil, and we're going to see how to work with global state using Recoil. So super exciting stuff. So what I'm going to do is inside of components, I'm going to create another folder called modal, because we're going to have a few different modals throughout the app. I think there's two of them. There's the authentication modal and then the creation of community modal. So we're going to have a folder that houses all of those components. And inside of modal, I'm going to create another folder called Auth to house all of the authentication modal components. And inside of here, I'm going to create a component called authmodal.tsx, which represents the sort of root component of the authentication modal. So I'm going to use our snippet, and our authentication modal is actually not going to take in any props. So we'll get rid of this. And what we're going to do now is we're just going to get rid of this div, and right now I'm just going to return a fragment that's completely empty. I will go back over here and implement this, auto import. And let's go grab the modal component from Chakra UI. So if you just Google Chakra UI modal dialog, we're just going to grab a sort of basic modal that's basically like this. So what I'm going to do is, we're not going to use this use disclosure hook, but I'll grab it just for now. We're going to sort of write our own custom implementation of opening and closing the modal. And I'm going to go use the import all, add all missing imports. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this lorem thing that's just like text, and I'm just going to write, here is the modal body. Cool. Now if I go to our application now, we should see this button, and if I click this, we should actually have a functioning modal now, which is pretty cool. Like, that's how easy it is to implement modals with these UI libraries. However, this is not the behavior we want. We want these buttons to trigger that. So we don't want this button to be actually inside of the modal itself, because these buttons live in our auth buttons component. Both of these onClick functions are going to trigger the opening of that modal. So we need to modify just the opening and closing of the logic a bit here, and that's what we're going to do now. All right, so this is where we're actually going to start working with Recoil and global state. The reason we need to implement global state here is because with the opening and closing of this modal does not actually live inside the modal itself. It is being triggered by other components, and this calls for moving our state upward. And we're actually going to see as we build this application that the authentication modal is going to be opened by a series of components. Like when you try to vote on a post that you're not logged in, it will just open the modal. If you try to join a community and you're not logged in, it'll open the modal. So we're going to need that opening and closing of modal state logic everywhere in our application, hence the need to apply Recoil here. So on that thought, let's go back to our app.tsx file, and we are now going to wrap our entire application in the Recoil provider. And this is going to be the last time we touch app.tsx. So all we need to do is just come over here and import this component called Recoil root, and that should just automatically import from Recoil. And we are just going to wrap the app in the root. Now we have access to global state everywhere in our app. It is that easy with Recoil. And I'm going to show you now how to write a atom in Recoil. And an atom is similar to, I guess, if you've worked with Redux before, it represents almost like a slice of state. And then we just have access to these atoms everywhere in our app. Recoil is a lot simpler than Redux, and it's so much quicker to get set up and going. So that's why I'm super pumped to be using it, and I'm super pumped to show you. All right, so what we're going to do now is inside of our source folder, we're going to create another folder called atoms. This is the convention. We create a folder called atoms, and inside of our atoms folder, we're going to create all of the pieces of global state that we're going to be using. So for example, I'm going to create a file in here called authmodal atom.ts. And I highly recommend you to check out the Recoil docs and just go through sort of the homepage of its explanation of atoms. And I'm going to try my best to explain everything that's sort of outlined here. But if you want further clarification, just feel free to go to the Recoil documentation. It is really great. And Recoil, for your information, is created by Facebook as well. I think it is fantastic, and I hope you do as well. So inside of our auth modal atom file, I'm going to import atom from Recoil, just like this. This is going to be our first glance at writing our own TypeScript. We're going to create an interface called auth modal state, and this interface is going to represent the properties that our auth modal atom is going to have. This is purely a TypeScript thing. You do not have to do this with JavaScript, but you will shortly see why this is so handy and the power of using types and interfaces with TypeScript. So our auth modal is going to have two properties. It's going to have an open property, which is going to represent whether it's open or not, and that's going to be true or false, a Boolean. And it's also going to have a view. And we're going to have basically three views for our auth modal. We're going to have a login view, or a sign up view, or a reset password view. Those are the three views that are possible inside of our modal. And this vertical line that you see here essentially means or. It is called the pipe operator in TypeScript, and it basically just means that we can have this thing or this thing or this thing. And also the reason that we didn't just make this of type string, which would also work too. We decided to be a bit more specific than just simply saying string, because we know that our modal is only going to have a predefined set of strings. And this is a common TypeScript thing. And again, if this makes no sense to you, we're going to write so much TypeScript and interfaces, and you're going to see this so much that it's going to make a lot more sense as we get some more repetition with it. It is a little bit weird at first, but just try to accept it right now. And as we build, it will make more and more sense, I promise. We need this to be part of our auth modal state so that the modal knows which component to render, because we're going to create components for logging in, signing up, and resetting password. And this will make more sense once we actually start building out the modal component itself. So I'm going to create another variable called default modal state. This is going to be of type auth modal state. And so now this thing, it knows what parameters to expect because we specified that up here. And so this is, again, the beauty of TypeScript. So our default state, we're going to initialize our state as false because we don't want it just to be open as soon as the application spins up. Our view is going to be default login. And look at this. This is, again, beautiful TypeScript because we specified the three possible views up here. So we're going to use login here. So now we're actually going to create the atom itself. So we're going to say export const auth modal state is going to be equal to an atom. And this atom is going to be of type auth modal state, and the key is going to be auth modal state, and the key is a parameter required by Recoil, and it's basically just a unique identifier for this specific atom. And this does need to be unique for all of your atoms. This is just so you don't have conflicting state. And the default value is going to be default modal state. And this default value just represents our initial value of state for this particular atom. And this is extremely similar to the useState hook, where you just pass it a default initial value as an argument. And also, one thing to note here with TypeScript is because I specified that this atom is of type auth modal state, if I were to give this thing anything other than that type, for example, a number, this is going to complain, and it's going to say that type number is not assignable to type auth modal state. So we are seeing more and more evidence of why TypeScript makes your code so much more bug-free over JavaScript. You would not get this type validation with JavaScript, and you wouldn't realize that this is an error until your application breaks and crashes, whereas in TypeScript, it tells you right away. So that's why we're able to use default modal state, because we told it that this atom is of type auth modal state, and we are passing it a default value of the same type that it's expecting, and that's why it is happy right now. Awesome. So now we're going to see how to actually use this global state that we just defined inside of our auth modal. So let's go to our auth modal. So we're going to get rid of this use disclosure hook provided by Chakra, and we're instead going to do something extremely similar to native React state, but instead of using the use state hook, we're going to use a hook called the use Recoil state. So we're going to say const modal state, and set modal state is going to be equal to use Recoil state, and then we just need to pass it that auth modal state atom that we created over here. That's all we need to do. And this is how easy it is to get Recoil set up. And this is literally all you need to do to set up global state. So we basically have our state value and then our setting state function. Same exact thing as use state with React. However, it is global, which is amazing and a lot simpler than React. So now for this modal, it is no longer going to use that isOpen variable that we got rid of before. It is now going to be modal state. When I go into this, it knows what properties are defined on that thing thanks to our interface. So modal state dot open. And we're going to remove this onClose function. We're instead going to define a function called const handle close. And this function is going to use the set modal state function. And we're going to take the previous state value and spread it because we only want to modify a single part of that piece of state, and that piece is going to be open, and we're going to set it to false. Now we're going to get rid of this button, and then inside of our modal onClose is now just going to be handle close. And we're not actually going to even have a modal footer, so I'm just going to get rid of this. Okay, so if we go back to our modal, we'll see that this actually doesn't do anything. The modal is not appearing because we have not told these buttons to trigger the modal to be open. So this is the reason why we needed this to be global, because now in our auth buttons component, we can call that setAuthModalState function that is going to modify that specific atom and set it to be open, which the modal is listening to. And so multiple components are able to read and write from the same atom and trigger global state updates. And so that's what we're going to do right here. So I'm going to enable these on-click things right here. And inside of auth buttons at the very top, I'm going to grab that setAuthModalState function. And there's another hook provided by Recoil called the useSetRecoilState. And we're using this because inside of this component, we only need access to the settingState function for this particular atom. We do not need the value of that state. We don't care inside of our buttons if the modal is open or what view it's in, right? If I go back to auth modal, we did need the value because we needed to tell this modal to be open or closed, and that's why we used just the generic use recoil state. Whereas over here, we're only going to use set recoil state. And there's a similar hook to use only the value, and it's I think just use recoil value. We're going to be seeing this a lot. By the end of this, you're going to understand this completely. So now in our onClick function for logging in, we want to call that setAuthModalState. And what we want to do is we want to set the openness of it to be true. And we also want to set the view to be login, right? And we're going to do the exact same thing down here, except we're just going to make this sign up. So this is basically just when we click login, it's going to open the modal, and it's also going to show the login view. And when we click sign up, it's going to open the modal and it's going to show the sign up view. So let's see if this works. So now if I click on login, we can see that the modal is actually being opened by both of these buttons. The view thing, we have not created the components for those yet, so don't worry. But now we can actually see how these components are modifying the openness of this modal. And that's super cool. We have just experienced global state. We now know how to modify any application state from any component using Recoil. All right, you guys, so with Recoil set up and with the modal structure put in place, we are now at a good place to actually start building out the structure of this modal and create the login with Google button and the inputs that the user can put their username and password to sign in or sign up. So let's get going on that. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is make the modal title change depending on what modal view we're in. And that comes from the value of modalState.view. So if I'm in the login view, I want it to say login. And if I'm in signing up, I want to sign up. And that's super easy to do. So all we need to do is make this text dynamic using JavaScript. So inside of our header, we can say modalState.view is equal to login. If this is true, then let's show the text login. And this is, if you have not seen this before, just the React way of saying that show this text if this is true. This is basically an if statement in React. You do the exact same thing for our view if it's equal to sign up. And we can say sign up. Okay, so now you'll see that this has changed to login because our default view is login. If I click sign up, it's sign up. So that's pretty cool. We can see that the second piece of state of our modal is now in action, which is that view. And we're going to add the third one, which was reset password. Awesome. And I will keep that modal open so we can see that being built dynamically. Okay, now we're going to work on the body. So we can get rid of this text here, and our body is going to have some CSS properties. So we're going to say display flex, and we have to manually specify this because this is not the flex component. So by default, it does not have this. So we just have to manually type it in. The flex direction is going to be column. We're going to say align items is going to be equal to center, and justify content. I don't know why I'm not getting autocomplete. It's going to also be equal to center. Okay, this is basically centering everything inside of this container. Inside of our modal body, we're going to have the flex component. We're going to make the direction of this column. The align is going to be center, and the justify is also going to be equal to center. And we're going to make the width of this equal to 70%. Awesome. Let's scroll up a bit so you can see. And I'll put a border on this just to make it clear on the right what we are looking at. It has nothing in it right now, so it just looks like a line. Now, what's actually going to go in here? This is going to be our OAuth buttons, so the sign in with Google button, and it's also going to consist of those inputs to put in your email and password. And if you look at the Reddit modal, you can see that we have this is what's going to be represented by our OAuth buttons, and then we're going to have these inputs as well. So basically, we're going to have a component called OAuth buttons, which we're going to create very soon. And we're also going to have a component called auth inputs, which is going to be those text inputs. And we're also going to have a component called reset password, which we will create at the very end. We'll do this after we have Firebase set up and everything, and we're actually able to create users. This will be the very last step of Firebase authentication, so we won't revisit this for a little bit. Okay, cool. And that is pretty much it. We just have to go and create these components, and our modal will be completely done. Okay, so inside of our auth modal folder, I'm going to create another file called auth inputs. And I'm going to use our snippet. So in this component, we are going to take in some props eventually, but for now, we're not going to take anything. So I'm just going to leave it blank for now. And I'm going to return our famous flex component, import that. The flex direction is going to be column. We're going to say align is equal to center, and our width is going to be 100% of our parent. And we're going to give this a margin top of 4. Okay, and now we're going to create more child components, and this one's going to be our login component, as well as our sign up component. And we also don't want to show both of these at the same time, right? We only want to show the login component when our modal view is login, and we only want to show this when our modal view is sign up. So what we can do is grab that modal state value, and we're going to use that use recoil value hook that I mentioned earlier, because in this file, we only care about the value of that state. We do not care about setting that state. So now in here, we can control which one we're seeing by tapping in to that modal state .view. If the modal state.view is equal to login, then show our login component. And if this is equal to sign up, then show our sign up component, which we have not created. And that is it for this component. And the reason we are keeping this component so small is because if we put everything from login and sign up in here, it would be a super giant mess. And we're going to keep it this way, and it keeps it very clean and readable so that if someone else were to read this, they would know exactly what's going on. And it's common practice in industry, and it makes refactoring the code a lot easier, and it makes the component overall more extendable in the future. All right, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to comment these out, and we're actually going to go create the login component now. So inside of our modal auth folder, I'm going to create another component called login.tsx. Use our snippet. All right, and this component is going to be our first component that is going to take in user inputs in the form of a form. So we're going to have 2 inputs that we're going to create here, and one is going to be for the email and one is going to be for the password. And we're going to need to create some state in order for our user to be able to type these values in and for us to submit it to Firebase. All right, so to do that, we're going to use the use state hook, and I'm going to create a state variable called login form, and the setter function is going to be called set login form, and we're going to say use state. And the initial value of our login form is going to have an email that is going to be empty and a password that is going to be empty as well. Okay, so now we can actually build the 2 inputs that are going to use and update that form state. So inside of our form, let's create an input, and that is going to come from Chakra UI. We're going to create 2 of them, just like this. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to our auth inputs component and just enable that login component so that we can actually see what we're building on the right. Since we have something defined now, we should be able to do that. And in order to see anything, I just need to go back to auth modal because that is the parent of auth inputs, and enable auth inputs. And that should automatically import. Just make sure it's imported at the top. Okay, so nothing's showing. Let me try refreshing the page. There are inputs now. The reason I have to refresh sometimes is because I take breaks between recording sessions, and I think the development server just like goes to sleep. So the hot reloading kind of is disabled for a quick second there until I refresh. Okay, so let's go back to our login form, and we're going to give some properties to our input. So this one is going to have a name of email, and we're going to give it a placeholder of email as well. And it's also going to have a type, and the type is going to be email. And we're going to give a margin bottom of 2, so there's some space between these two things. And we're also going to pass an onChange function, which we're going to create in just a second. Save that so it auto formats. And we're going to do basically the exact same thing to this one down here. So I'm going to say name is equal to password. The placeholder is going to be password. Our type is going to be password. And that's so that we get these if I save that, that's so that we get these secretive dots here. And our onChange is going to be just an empty function for now. And so we're going to come up here and define 2 functions. And those 2 functions are going to be that onChange function and the submit function for when we actually submit this form. So let's also create the button that we're going to use to submit this form. And we're going to import a button from Chakra UI. And this is going to say log in. All right, so now we have pretty much everything in place. We have 2 inputs and we have a login button to submit our form. And in order to make this so this button actually triggers a submittal of the form, we just have to say type equals submit. And since this is wrapped in a form, it knows to call the onSubmit function that we're going to create in a second when this button is clicked. So what we're going to do is create that onSubmit function. It's going to be empty for now, and we're also going to create the onChange function for our inputs, which are going to be triggered every time a user types into the input. It's going to update our state. So now let's come down here, and I'm going to change both of these 2 things to be onChange. So they're both going to call the same onChange function, and I'm going to show you how you can have multiple inputs use a single onChange function in your forms. Rather than having to create separate state for the email and the password, you can just have a single state, in our case login form, and a single onChange handler will handle those updates. And before we do that, I'm just going to quickly add the onSubmit to the onSubmit. Perfect. So our onChange function implicitly takes in an event. This event is a change event that is emitted by these inputs. So every time the inputs change, it emits an event, and it is going to be captured by this function. So the type of this event we can say is react.changeEvent, and the type of HTML element that's emitting this event is an HTML input element. And this is all purely TypeScript. The reason we do this is so that when we're using our event inside of our function, we have auto completion and we can see all of the properties on our event. So TypeScript at its finest, once again. So in our onChange function, we are going to update form state. So we're going to say set login form, and we're going to take the previous value of state, and we're going to spread it because we only want to update a single piece of our form state, and that piece depends on which input is emitting this event. And how do we know that? Well, luckily on our event, we have event.target.name. And where's that name coming from? That's because we gave these inputs a name. So every time this particular input emits an event, that event contains the name of the target that emitted the event. And so that's how we're able to know which piece of state to actually set. So we can say event.target.value, and that's just going to be the value that is inside of the input. So now if I go to my browser, I'm going to go to my React Chrome extension. If you do not have the React Chrome extension, I highly recommend you to get it. It is extremely useful, and it's much more accurate in debugging React applications than doing console logs. So highly recommend that. And I'm just going to use the React selector to inspect our login form. And you can see that it has a piece of state with our form that has email and password. And so thanks to our onChange function that we just wrote, when I type into here, you can see that state is updating in the React extension. And same with the password. And it knows which input specifically we're typing into. All right, so now that that's handled, let's actually style this form because right now it looks like garbage. Okay, so what we're going to do is on our button, let's add a width of 100% and a height of 36 pixels. And on our button, I'm also going to add a margin top of 2 and a margin bottom of 2 to give it some space around it. And now let's add all of the styling to our input to make it look as closely as possible to these Reddit inputs. And also our modal is going to vary slightly in how it looks just because I didn't like this massive white space on the Reddit form. So ours is just going to be more of this without the white space. And there's going to be little things that vary. Like I'm not going to add like this text. I don't think that's very useful, but everything else is going to be very much similar. Let's go back to our app, and I'm just going to go quickly center this text because it is supposed to be over here. So I'm just going to go quickly back to the auth modal, to our header. I'm just going to say text align is going to be equal to center, and that's going to center that for us. And I'm also just going to get rid of this red border. All right, and I'm also just going to quickly add some bottom padding to our modal body just to give it some more room at the bottom there. And let's go back to our login and get going on these inputs. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is add the required property to both of these inputs, just so that we're not able to submit our form if one of these things is empty. So let's go down here, and I'm going to add a font size of 10 point, make it a bit smaller than it is right now, and I'm going to style the placeholder by using the placeholder pseudo class, and I'm going to make the color of this gray 500. And I'm going to add some hover styling as well. We are going to make the background white, the border 1 pixel solid, and the border color is going to be blue 500. Perfect. All right, and let's also add some focus styling for when this thing is clicked on and in focus. We're going to make the outline none, and the 3 remaining things are going to be the exact same as these. So I'm just going to copy these and paste them down here. And we are going to make the background color gray 50, which is a really light gray. So the exact same styles are going to apply to our password input. So I'm just going to grab all of these. We started at font size, come down here, paste them down here, and I think we're just also missing the margin on our password input. So I'll throw that in there as well to get more spacing between that and the button. All right, so this is looking really good. You can see that we have hover styling, focus styling. It's all extremely similar to Reddit. So I'm really happy with how this turned out. All right, so now the only thing we need to add to login is that text at the bottom that says new to Reddit, sign up, and that's going to switch the view to actually be the sign up view. So let's go quickly do that. That won't take very long at all. All right, so beneath our login button, I'm going to create a flex container, and this flex container is going to have the property font size 9 point. So all the fonts inside of here are going to be size 9, and we're going to make justify content equal to center. And inside of here, we're going to have text, and text is pretty much just a p tag with 0 margin. That is a Chakra component. And this is going to say new here. And also a quick keyword shortcut. If you want to duplicate lines, which is something we do a lot, you can press Option, Shift, and then the up or down arrows depending on which direction you want it to show up in. So for example, if I want the same line to show up beneath it, I can do Option, Shift, down arrow, and it'll duplicate the line below it, which is super handy. All right, so this one is going to say, in all caps, sign up. And that looks like this. So we're just going to add some margin right of 1 to our new here text. And then we're also going to give this a color of blue 500. And we're going to make it a little bit heavier of a font. We're going to say font weight is going to be equal to 700. We're going to make the cursor equal to pointer so that when we hover over it, it has the pointer cursor because it's something that we can click on. And when we click on this thing, all we need to do is modify our auth modal state and change the view from login to sign up, which is something we've already kind of seen how to do. So what I'm going to do is go up to our component, and I'm going to grab the set auth modal state function using that use set recoil state hook that we saw before, pass it our auth modal state atom, and we only need the setting of auth modal state. We don't care about the auth modal state itself. And we come down here, and on this sign up text, which is the thing we're going to click to toggle that view, I'm going to add an on click function here. Let's just save this so that it auto formats so we can see it. And this is going to call that set auth modal state function. It's going to take the previous state, and we're only going to modify the view. We're going to change the view to sign up. So now if we click on that text, let's move that blue highlight, if we click on that text, it actually modifies the view, and we'll add the reverse in the sign up component. We'll make it so that we can go back to login, just like you would see in any regular authentication form. Perfect. So that's super easy with Recoil. All right, so the structure of this component is pretty much done. All that we need to add in here is the Firebase logic, which is going to be handled by this onSubmit function. The modal is getting very close to being done. We just need to create our signup component, which is going to be very, very similar to this component. It's pretty much the exact same thing. It just has a third input to confirm the password. And then all we need to do is create the OAuth button or the login with Google button. That will not take very long at all because it's just a single button. And then we will be ready to hook up our application to a Firebase backend and start creating users with Firebase authentication. So we are getting super close to that. We are just a few minutes away. All right, so let's go quickly build that signup component. So inside of our auth folder, the same place where login is, I'm just going to create another file called signup.tsx. Inside of here, going to use our snippet. Going to get rid of the type because we are not going to take any props into this component. And we are going to just go and copy pretty much everything from login into here because it's essentially the exact same thing with just a few minor changes. So let's grab everything inside of here up to this bracket, copy that, and bring it over here. So just paste that in there, and we're going to get a bunch of angry stuff because we have not imported anything. So let's go to this input and try doing this add all missing imports thing with command period and see if that solves all that stuff. So it does. What is going on here? Oh, I think text for some reason with Chakra, it just like doesn't auto import for some reason. It's kind of weird. All the other ones do, but we sometimes have to go manually import text from Chakra. No idea why, but that is just how it works. Okay, so that is not showing. I'm just going to quickly do, it's not showing because if I go to auth inputs, we are not even rendering it right now. So let's go and do that inside of auth inputs, the same way we did login. Okay, so now if I open up signup, I should see these two inputs. It's the exact same component as login, so there is no difference. So let's make those minor modifications to that now. Okay, so our signup form is going to have pretty much the exact same state as our login form, except it's going to be, I'm just going to call it signup form and set signup form. And in addition to having an email and password, it's going to have a confirm password thing as a third argument. We just need to change this to set signup form, and the onChange is going to behave the exact same way. Even with our third input, you could technically have 100 inputs if you want, which could be handled by this onChange. As long as they have that name, you are good to go. And let's come down here and grab this input and duplicate it underneath. And yeah, you know how I showed you how you can duplicate single lines with that keyboard shortcut option shift down arrow or up arrow? You can also do that with multiple lines as well. So good to know. That's basically what I just did with that input. So we now have the third input there. We're just going to change the properties of this. So the name of this is going to be confirm password. The placeholder is going to be confirm password. The type is still going to be password, and everything else is going to be the same. Down here, we're going to change this to sign up because this is the sign up form, not the login form. And our text at the bottom is going to change here a little bit as well. I forget exactly what it says on Reddit. New to Reddit, sign up. In the sign up form, it says already a Redditor, login. So let's type that in here. Already a Redditor. If you are a Redditor already, let's log in with a space. Cool, and we're going to change the view. We are in the signup view. We want to modify the view to be log in. Awesome. I think we're pretty much done this component now. That's how easy it was to create this signup component. It's literally the exact same thing, just with a slightly different form and the text changes. That is all. All right, so the only thing left to put inside of our signup component is going to be that Firebase logic, which we are so close to. All we need to do is go and create that OAuth buttons component with our login with Google button. So let's go and do that now. It's going to be very short. It's a very simple component. So let's go into our auth folder and create another component called OAuth buttons.tsx. Even though for this tutorial, we're only going to be able to log in with Google, you could, in this same component, add as many third-party OAuth provider buttons as you would want to log in with GitHub, Twitter, Facebook. I'm only going to use Google, but this is where you would add any button for a third-party OAuth provider, hence the name OAuth buttons. All right, so I'm going to use our snippet, and I'm going to get rid of our prop type because we do not need it, and I'm going to get rid of it here as well. And inside of this component, we are going to return our Chakra Flex component and also a button from Chakra. And this button is going to say, continue with Google. All right, and let's go make it so we can actually see this component show up on our browser. So inside of Auth Modal, we can now go enable this component because it exists. Let's import it. Cool, and so now we actually have a button that says continue with Google. That is pretty hype. Okay, so let's go back to our OAuth buttons component. Where did it go? Here. And just to illustrate what I was saying earlier about being able to add any other provider you'd want in here, I'm just gonna say some other provider. So you know that this is where you would put those buttons. Okay, and this flex, we're just gonna give a direction of column, and that should fix that. And we're also going to give a width of 100% and a margin bottom of 4. Perfect. All right, and this Google button does not look anything like a login with Google button, so let's make that happen. So inside of our Google button, we're going to just remove this text for a sec, and we are going to add an image from Chakra, and the source of that image is going to be one of those images that I had you guys insert into the project earlier. Where is it now? It's in the public images. It is the Google logo .png. So that is the reason why this is in the project. It is for this button. So if I say images / Google logo .png, we can see that show up on the button there. It looks really big. So let's give it a height of 20 pixels. Awesome. And let's add our text back in there, continue with Google. And I'm not sure if you remember, but if we go back and look at this button.ts file in our Chakra for our global button styling, I had this variant called OAuth that I created for all of the OAuth buttons that you could potentially create. So we are going to use this for our Google button, but if you add any more third-party OAuth provider buttons, then you can use the same variant as well. So let's go over here and let's add that variant to be OAuth. Cool. And let's just add a bottom margin of 2. And this button here on the bottom, I'm also going to give it a variant of OAuth so that it looks the same. And what I'm going to do is just add a bit of right margin to our Google logo, so there's some space there. And our login modal is really the only component we're going to build that varies at all from the original Reddit design, just because I didn't really like this white space, but our modal is still super clean. Okay, so all that's missing now is just that text in between the OAuth buttons and these inputs that says or. So it's like login with this or this. Where that's going to be is inside of our auth modal root. And that's going to go right in here. So I'm just going to add text that says or. And because text doesn't want to seem to automatically import from Chakra for some reason, we just have to go manually add it to our imports up top. And we can make the color of this gray 400, and let's make the font weight 700. Let's actually change this to 500. And you will notice that you see the OAuth buttons in both the login and the signup view. And the reason we do that is because when you're logging in with Google, it doesn't matter if you're a new or a returning user. Logging in is the exact same thing. And we structured our components that way. So we have the OAuth buttons here, and that lives as a sibling as auth inputs. And auth inputs is the parent of login and signup. So they will appear in both of those views. All right, so we are now done the UI structure of our modal, other than the resetting of the password, which we're going to do after we set up Firebase and we're able to create users. And we are now ready to move into Firebase and start creating users. I think we're going to conclude here for part 1. We did cover a lot of fundamentals in this video, so the next parts will probably move a lot quicker because now we have the fundamentals of Recoil and Chakra all settled. So be sure to subscribe to the channel for the subsequent parts, and I will see you there.